This is HOA Karen Patrol. It started with snow and ended with a board meltdown. Teresa screamed that the HOA had zero tolerance today, and she was enforcing it on me. I will re-inspect at sundown, and you will pay for the re-inspection. She stood 3 feet away on my driveway in Redmond, Washington, her thin reading glasses perched on her nose for dramatic effect, jabbing a laminated policy sheet at my chest like a weapon. I held a snow shovel in one hand and a tow release receipt and a plastic sleeve in the other, trying to keep my breathing steady. My work van sat behind me in the driveway, engine ticking as it cooled. I work as a home warranty claims rep. I read fine print for a living, and I knew she was inventing rules faster than I could shovel snow. This was the Parkside Snow Emergency Corridor Commons Association, a place where the board uses vendors as muscle and pretends it is policy. Teresa Williams was the Community Standards Chair, which meant she could interpret guidelines however she wanted and call it enforcement. The storm had dumped 8 inches overnight, and I had been out since 5 in the morning clearing my driveway and sidewalk before my shift. I needed my van ready at dawn because my job requires a work vehicle at all times, and any delay would wreck my entire week of claim inspections across 3 counties. Teresa pointed at a patch of black ice on my sidewalk near the curb. "You created that hazard with improper shoveling technique," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the wind. "I have photographic evidence and 3 neighbor complaints already filed. The fine schedule starts at $200 per day until correction, and if you do not comply by tonight, we move to a lien with legal fees and a winter enforcement surcharge." She pulled out a small handheld stopwatch from her pocket and clicked it once. "I have all day, and so does my fine meter." I stared at the ice patch. It was maybe 2 feet across, a thin glaze where meltwater from my roof had refrozen during the night. I had salted the entire walkway an hour ago, and the ice was already starting to break up in the weak morning sun. There was no way this was a violation of any real rule, and even if it was, the timeline she was describing made no sense. HOA enforcement required written notice and a minimum compliance window. But Teresa did not care about timelines. She cared about control. I set the shovel down against my van and pulled out my phone. "I need to see the written notice and the section of the covenants you are citing," I said, keeping my voice calm. Teresa smirked and tapped the laminated sheet she was holding. "This is all the notice you need, sweetheart. You should have read the rules before you moved in." She emphasized the word sweetheart like it was an insult. "I have been on this board for 6 years, and I know every line of our winter emergency protocols. You are in violation of Section 12.4, subsection C. Failure to maintain pedestrian safety zones during active snow events." I took a photo of the laminated sheet she was holding, zooming in on the text. It was a printout, not an official covenant page, and the formatting looked homemade. The section number she cited did not even exist in the covenants I had reviewed when I bought the townhouse. But arguing with Teresa in the driveway was not going to solve anything. I needed to get to work, and I needed her to leave so I could finish clearing the rest of the walk before the next wave of snow hit. Teresa clicked her stopwatch again and tucked it back into her pocket. "You have until sundown," she repeated. "I will return at 5:45 for a re-inspection. If this ice is still here, the fine triples and I file for an emergency board hearing. You will also be billed for the re-inspection visit at $75 per occurrence." She turned on her heel and started walking back toward the street, her boots crunching through the snow. "Oh, and one more thing," she called over her shoulder. "If your van is parked in the driveway past 8 tonight, that is another violation." Snow emergency rules require all vehicles in garages or designated overflow lots during active weather advisories. I looked at my garage. It was full of storage boxes I had not unpacked yet because I had only moved in 3 months ago. The overflow lot was 2 blocks away and unplowed. Teresa knew all of this because she had been the one sending me passive-aggressive welcome emails about storage violations and guest parking limits since the day I closed on the property. This was not about ice or safety. This was about her establishing dominance. I went inside and called my neighbor Marcus, a renter advocate who had warned me about Teresa during my first week in the neighborhood. He answered on the second ring. "She is doing it again," I said. Black ice on the sidewalk, invented rule citations, and now she wants my van in the garage by 8, or she will fine me for parking violations during a snow emergency. Marcus sighed. That is her favorite move. She rewrites the enforcement guidelines every winter and pretends they have always been that way. Did she give you written notice with a compliance timeline? I told him about the laminated sheet in the sundown ultimatum. He laughed, but it was a bitter sound. That is not legal notice. You need a formal violation letter with at least 72 hours to respond. She is bluffing, but she will keep escalating until you push back with documentation. I spent the next hour digging out my garage enough to fit the van inside, throwing boxes into a corner and sweating through my coat despite the cold. By the time I finished, it was almost 9, and I was already late for my first claim inspection in Bellevue. I backed the van into the garage, locked up, and headed out. Teresa was nowhere in sight, but I knew she would be back at sundown with her stopwatch and her smug expression. The day was brutal. 3 claims back to back, all weather-related roof leaks and frozen pipe damage, and every homeowner wanted to argue about coverage limits. I got back to my townhouse at 4:30, just as the light was starting to fade. The ice patch on my sidewalk had melted completely, leaving only wet pavement and a few grains of salt. I took photos with my phone, making sure to capture the timestamp and the clear walkway. Then I went inside and started going through my files. I had been keeping a folder since my first week in the neighborhood. Every email from Teresa, every bogus complaint she had filed, every notice that cited non-existent rules or invented deadlines. I also had an invoice trail I had been building, showing a pattern of preferential treatment for certain contractors. Teresa had a cozy relationship with a tow vendor named Rapid Response Towing, and the call logs I had requested under the HOA records policy showed she had used them 11 times in the past 4 months, always for vehicles she claimed were in violation of parking rules. The problem was, half of those vehicles had been legally parked, according to the actual covenants, and the owners had been forced to pay tow fees and fines to get their cars back. At 5:40, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Teresa standing on my front step, her thin reading glasses back on, her handheld stopwatch in one hand and a small notepad with wet pages in the other. She looked past me at the sidewalk, her eyes narrowing. "The ice is gone," she said slowly, as if this was somehow suspicious. "That does not change the fact that you created a hazard this morning. The fine stands, and you still owe the reinspection fee. I have documented your non-compliance, and I will be recommending a formal hearing at the next board meeting." I pulled out my phone and showed her the time-stamped photos. "The ice melted naturally after I salted it this morning," I said. "Your reinspection was not necessary, and I am not paying a fee for a service I did not request." Teresa's jaw tightened. "You do not get to decide what is necessary. I am the Community Standards Chair, and I determine enforcement priorities. You will receive a formal notice within 48 hours, and if you do not pay, we will file a lien against your property. I let her threaten a lien, because that threat would look terrible on the record. I kept my voice level. I will be filing a formal complaint with the management company and requesting a full audit of your enforcement actions. I have documentation showing a pattern of selective enforcement and vendor favoritism. If you want to escalate this, we can do it in front of the entire board. Teresa took a step back, her face flushing. You are making a big mistake, she said, her voice rising. I have all day, and so does my fine meter. She turned and walked back toward the street, her boots slipping slightly on a patch of slush. She caught herself and kept walking, but I saw her glance back at me with a look of pure venom. If you are enjoying this snow emergency chaos, hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA nightmare stories. I spent the weekend building my case. I requested every tow log, every complaint filed in my name, and every communication between Teresa and the management company. The HOA was required to provide records within 10 business days, but Teresa sent me an email on Sunday night saying my request was denied due to privacy concerns. That was a red flag. Record requests were protected under Washington state law, and the only reason to deny them was if she was hiding something. Marcus came over on Monday afternoon with a stack of documents he had pulled from his own battles with Teresa. She tried the same thing on 3 other owners last winter, he said, spreading the papers across my kitchen table. 2 of them paid the fines just to make it stop. The 3rd one fought back, and she dropped the whole thing the day before the hearing. She does not want to go on record because her enforcement actions do not match the actual covenants. I looked through the documents. One was a complaint about snow piled too close to a mailbox. Another was a fine for using the wrong kind of ice melt. A third was a tow notice for a car parked legally in a guest spot during a storm. Every single one had Teresa's signature and a reference to her handheld stopwatch timing violations. Tuesday morning, I got a certified mail notice. It had been delayed 3 days because of the weather, and Teresa had already sent me an email claiming I was in non-compliance for not responding within her invented 48-hour window. The notice inside was a formal violation letter, but it was dated after her initial confrontation, which meant she had backdated it to make it look like she had followed procedure. The fine schedule was even more aggressive than she had threatened. $200 for the initial hazard, $75 for the reinspection, and a new $250 winter enforcement surcharge for failure to comply. Total, $525, due within 10 days or the HOA would file a lien. I scanned the letter and sent it to Marcus. His response was immediate. She is panicking. That surcharge is completely made up. File a dispute with the management company and copy the entire board. Make her explain where that fee is codified. I drafted the email that night, attaching photos, timestamps, and excerpts from the actual covenants, showing there was no such thing as a winter enforcement surcharge. I also attached the tow logs I had finally received from a sympathetic board member who was tired of Teresa's power trips. The logs showed Teresa had called rapid response towing 6 times in December alone, and 4 of those calls had resulted in vehicles being towed from legal parking spots. Wednesday afternoon, Teresa showed up at my door again. This time, she was not alone. She had a man with her, a gate technician with a tool bag who looked confused about why he was there. Teresa pointed at my driveway. "I need you to inspect the drainage slope," she told him. "This property is contributing runoff to the common sidewalk and creating ice hazards for the entire block." The technician looked at the driveway, then at Teresa, then at me. I am just here to check the gate motor at the south entrance, he said slowly. I do not do drainage inspections. Teresa's face went red. I am the Community Standards Chair, and I am directing you to perform this inspection as part of your contract with the HOA. The technician shifted his tool bag on his shoulder. That is not in my scope of work, he said. You would need to call a civil engineer for drainage issues. Teresa opened her mouth to argue, but the technician was already walking away, muttering something under his breath. I caught the words vendor blacklist and not worth it. Teresa turned back to me, her thin reading glasses sliding down her nose. You think you are clever, she said, her voice shaking. You think you can turn people against me and get away with it. I have been protecting this community for 6 years, and I am not going to let some new owner with an attitude problem undermine everything I have built. That evening, I got an email from the HOA management company. They had received my dispute and were scheduling an emergency board meeting for Friday night to review Teresa's enforcement actions. The email also mentioned that several other owners had filed similar complaints in the past week, and the board was considering an interim management audit to ensure compliance with state law and the governing documents. I forwarded the email to Marcus. He replied with a single sentence, "She is cooked." Thursday was quiet, which made me nervous. Teresa had not shown up, had not sent any new emails, and had not left any more notices on my door. I spent the day catching up on work and prepping for the board meeting. I printed every document I had, organized them into a binder with tabs, and practiced my presentation. I was not going to let Teresa twist the narrative or play the victim. I had proof of her pattern, proof of her vendor favoritism, and proof that she had been making up rules for months. Friday afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered and heard a voice I did not recognize. "This is Dan from Rapid Response Towing. I heard you are going to the board meeting tonight about Teresa Williams. I thought you should know she called us 4 times this week, trying to get us to tow your van. We told her no every time, because your vehicle is not in violation of any parking rule we can enforce. She even offered to pay us a bonus if we would hook it and move it to the overflow lot. We declined, and I documented the calls. If you need a statement, I can provide one." I thanked Dan and asked him to send the documentation to my email. He agreed and hung up. That was the missing piece. Teresa had not just been abusing enforcement rules. She had been trying to coordinate harassment with vendors and incentivize them to act outside their contracts. That crossed the line from petty HOA tyranny into potential fraud and misuse of community funds. I added Dan's statement to my binder and headed to the clubhouse for the meeting. The meeting started at 7. The clubhouse parking lot was half full, which was unusual for a board meeting. Most owners did not bother showing up unless they were being fined or facing a lien. Tonight, there were at least 15 people in the room, and I recognized several faces from Marcus's stack of documents. Teresa sat at the head table with the rest of the board, her thin reading glasses on, her hands folded in front of her. She looked calm, but I could see her jaw working as she scanned the crowd. The board president called the meeting to order and went through the standard procedural items. Then he cleared his throat and said, "We have received multiple complaints regarding enforcement actions taken by our Community Standards Chair, Teresa Williams. Tonight, we will hear from the affected owners and review the documentation they have provided. We will also discuss whether an interim audit is necessary." Teresa leaned forward, her voice sharp. "I would like to state for the record that every action I have taken has been in full compliance with our covenants and our board-approved enforcement policies. Any suggestion otherwise is a coordinated attack by a small group of owners who do not want to follow the rules. I was the third person to speak. I walked to the front of the room with my binder and started laying out the case. I showed the timeline of Teresa's confrontation with me, the backdated notice, the invented winter enforcement surcharge, and the tow log showing her pattern of calling rapid response towing for legally parked vehicles. Then I pulled out Dan's statement and read it aloud, including the part about Teresa offering a bonus to tow my van. The room went silent. Teresa's face went pale, then red. "That is a lie," she said, her voice rising. "I never offered any vendor a bonus. This is defamation, and I will be consulting my attorney." I kept my voice calm. "I have the call logs and a signed statement from the vendor. I also have email records showing you coordinated multiple enforcement actions with the management company without notifying the full board. You have been operating outside your authority for months, and you have been using community funds to incentivize vendors to act as your personal enforcement arm." Teresa stood up, her chair scraping loudly on the floor. "You should have read the rules before you moved in, sweetheart," she shouted. "I have all day, and so does my fine meter. This is my community, and I will not let you destroy it." The board president held up a hand. "Teresa, sit down. We are going to review all of this documentation and we will make a decision based on the facts." Teresa sat, but her hands were shaking. The board went into a brief recess, and I stepped outside to catch my breath. Marcus found me in the hallway. "You nailed her," he said. "She cannot defend any of it. The tow vendor statement is the kill shot. The board has to act now, or they risk liability." I nodded, but I was not celebrating yet. Teresa was the kind of person who would burn the neighborhood down before she admitted she was wrong. When the meeting resumed, the board president read a prepared statement. "After reviewing the documentation provided tonight, the board has decided to initiate a management audit that will examine all enforcement actions, vendor contracts, and financial disbursements related to community standards and winter emergency protocols. During the audit, all enforcement actions initiated by Teresa Williams are suspended pending review. Teresa will remain on the board, but will have no authority to issue fines, coordinate vendor services, or conduct inspections until the audit is complete. The board also votes to freeze all winter enforcement policies until we can rewrite them in compliance with state law and our governing documents." The motion passed 4-1. Teresa was the only no vote. Teresa stood up and walked out of the meeting without saying another word. I watched her go, her thin reading glasses still perched on her nose, her hands balled into fists. The board president turned to me. "We apologize for the distress this has caused you and the other affected owners. We will be scheduling individual meetings to discuss refunds and corrective actions." I thanked him and left the clubhouse. The snow had started falling again, light flakes drifting through the parking lot lights. I felt exhausted, but I also felt like I could finally breathe. Saturday morning, I got an email from the management company. They had completed a preliminary review of Teresa's enforcement actions and found that she had issued over 30 invalid fines in the past 6 months, totaling nearly $18,000. The company was terminating its contract with the HOA effective immediately and recommending that the board hire an interim manager to oversee operations until a new company could be selected. The email also stated that Teresa's timeline for my ice hazard violation had been proven false, with timestamps from security camera footage showing the ice had formed naturally overnight and had melted before her reinspection. I forwarded the email to Marcus with a short message. She is done. The audit took 3 weeks. During that time, Teresa did not attend a single board meeting and did not respond to any emails from the management company or the board. Rumors started circulating that she was planning to sue the HOA for defamation and wrongful suspension. Marcus told me she had hired a lawyer, but the lawyer had reportedly dropped her as a client after reviewing the evidence. The board hired an interim manager, a no-nonsense woman named Claire, who had managed several large HOAs in the Seattle area. Her first action was to send a community-wide email apologizing for the enforcement chaos and promising a full policy rewrite with owner input. The final audit report came out in late February. It confirmed everything I had documented and more. Teresa had been selectively enforcing rules based on personal grudges. She had been coordinating with vendors to create fake violations. She had been pocketing reinspection fees that were never authorized by the board. She had been using her position to intimidate owners into paying fines rather than fighting back. The report recommended that the board terminate Teresa's position as Community Standards Chair and consider legal action to recover misappropriated funds. The board voted unanimously to accept the recommendations. Teresa resigned from the board 2 days later. Her resignation letter was 1 sentence long. I can no longer serve a community that does not value accountability and leadership. The board did not respond. Claire sent another community-wide email thanking Teresa for her years of service and announcing that the board would be holding elections in March to fill the open seat. I did not run. I had no interest in spending my evenings managing HOA drama. I just wanted to live in my townhouse, do my job, and not get harassed for shoveling my driveway. March brought warmer weather and the first signs of spring. The snowbanks melted, the black ice disappeared, and the neighborhood started to look normal again. The new Community Standards Chair was a retired teacher named Linda, who had lived in the neighborhood for 15 years and had no interest in power trips or stopwatch enforcement. Her first act was to host a community meeting to rewrite the winter emergency protocols with input from actual owners. The new rules were simple, reasonable, and based on the actual covenants. No more invented surcharges, no more backdated notices, no more vendor blacklists. I ran into Teresa one more time in early April. I was at the grocery store loading bags into my van when I saw her in the parking lot. She was walking toward her car, her thin reading glasses still perched on her nose, a small notepad with wet pages tucked under her arm. She saw me and froze. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she turned and walked in the opposite direction, her shoulders hunched, her steps quick and uneven. I did not say anything. There was nothing left to say. The HOA settled with me and the other affected owners in May. I got a full refund of the fines Teresa had issued, plus a written apology from the board and a commitment to cover my legal consultation fees. The settlement also included a policy change requiring all enforcement actions to be reviewed by the full board before any fines or liens could be filed. It was not perfect, but it was a start. Marcus called it a win. I called it exhausting. By summer, the neighborhood felt different. The new board was transparent. The new management company was responsive, and the enforcement policies actually matched the covenants. I still got the occasional email about parking or trash cans, but they were polite, reasonable, and always included a clear path to compliance. No more stopwatches, no more invented fees, no more threats of liens and lawsuits. It was what an HOA was supposed to be. A functional, boring administrative body that handled common area maintenance and stayed out of people's lives. I kept the binder of documents in my office just in case. Marcus told me I should write a guide for other owners dealing with rogue board members, but I never got around to it. The whole experience had been draining enough that I did not want to relive it by writing it down. But I did keep the tow release receipt in a sleeve, tucked into the binder, as a reminder. That receipt had been the start of everything. Teresa had tried to tow my van while I was holding a shovel, and that overreach had been her undoing. She had tried to flex authority, and the policy said she could not. The HOA froze enforcement pending a policy rewrite, and Teresa's timeline was proven false with timestamps. A management audit exposed the pattern, and the whole thing collapsed under the weight of her own lies. The funny thing was, Teresa had been so sure she was untouchable. She had spent 6 years building a system where she could enforce whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted, and no one had pushed back hard enough to stop her. But all it took was one owner with a filing system and a willingness to call her bluff. The stopwatch, the laminated policy sheet, the bogus reinspection fees, the cozy vendor relationships. It all fell apart the moment someone forced her to explain it on the record. She had been hoisted by her own rules, and the irony was not lost on anyone who had been watching. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Teresa had moved out of state. Someone said she had taken a job with another HOA in Arizona. I hoped the owners there had better luck than we did. I also hoped she had learned something from the experience, but I doubted it. People like Teresa do not change. They just find new places to enforce, new owners to intimidate, and new stopwatches to click. By the time fall rolled around, I had almost forgotten what it felt like to dread coming home. The neighborhood was quiet. The board was stable. The management company was competent. I could shovel my driveway without worrying about someone timing me with a stopwatch. I could park my van in the driveway without worrying about a tow truck showing up. I could live my life without constantly looking over my shoulder for the next bogus violation notice. It was a strange kind of freedom. The freedom to just exist in my own home without being harassed. Marcus and I still grabbed coffee occasionally. He told me the new board was working on a long-term capital improvement plan and that the reserves were finally being managed properly. He also told me that Linda, the new community standards chair, had implemented a peer review process for all enforcement actions. No single board member could issue a fine or call a vendor without approval from at least 2 other board members. It was a simple fix, but it was effective. Teresa's reign of terror had been built on unchecked authority. Take away the unchecked part, and the terror disappears. I never did figure out what Teresa's endgame was. Maybe she genuinely believed she was protecting the community. Maybe she just liked the power. Maybe she had been doing it for so long that she did not know how to stop. It did not matter. What mattered was that the system had finally worked. The owners had pushed back, the board had listened, and the management company had been held accountable. It was not dramatic. It was not glamorous. It was just a bunch of people following the rules and refusing to let one person twist them into a weapon. Winter came around again, and with it came the first snow of the season. I shoveled my driveway at dawn, just like I had the year before. But this time, no one showed up with a stopwatch. No one threatened a lien. No one invented a new surcharge. I finished shoveling, salted the sidewalk, and went to work. It was boring. It was normal. It was exactly what it should have been. I appreciate you hanging in there.